The ultrasound wasn't hers. The sheet of slick, cold paper seemed to burn the tips of Sarah's fingers. She only wanted to find the car insurance policy, a trivial document for a mundane task. Ryan's desk drawer was, as always, a mess of papers, contracts, and receipts. As she pulled it open, the sheet slipped out, floating like a feather to the office floor, an innocent movement that detonated her world. When she bent down to pick it up, the black and white image hit her first. The unmistakable outline of a fetus, a tiny life suspended in darkness. And then, the name at the top of the page, Tiffany Sterling. The date was 2 weeks ago. The gestational age, 12 weeks, 3 months. If anyone ever doubted her strength, they should sign up to watch. Because sometimes, the courage of a woman alone is what the world most needs to see. The air abandoned Sarah's lungs in a silent hiss. She remained crouched on the floor of the quiet office, the paper trembling in her hand. The floor didn't disappear. The sensation was more visceral, more violent. It was as if the very center of gravity of her body had shifted, pulling her organs down with an overwhelming force. Tiffany Sterling. The name echoed in her mind, the daughter of Ryan's boss. A woman in her early 20s, known in the social circles of Chicago for her beauty, her multi-million-dollar inheritance, and her reputation for being as unstable as she was rich. Sarah stood up, her body moving with the stiffness of an automaton. She placed the ultrasound on the desk, next to a framed photo from their wedding day. The two images, side by side, were a mockery, the promise of a future and the proof of its destruction. At that exact moment, she felt a subtle nausea, a persistent fatigue she had been ignoring for days, attributing it to the stress of her physical therapy clinic. The suspicion that had led her to buy a pregnancy test that morning, still untouched in her purse, now turned into a terrifying certainty. When Ryan arrived home, he found her in the office, standing by the desk. The ultrasound was exactly where she had left it. He walked in smiling, talking about the traffic on the Kennedy Expressway, but the smile died on his lips the instant he saw the paper. His face lost all color. "What is this?" Sarah's voice was a thread, devoid of any emotion. Ryan looked from the paper to her, and the panic in his eyes quickly gave way to a mask of indignation. Aggression was his first line of defense. "Are you crazy? Where did you find that? That's a lab mistake. You're always looking for trouble where there is none. Always hysterical." The words hit her like stones. Hysterical. The classic weapon to disarm an inconvenient truth, the accusation that turns the victim into a mad woman. But Sarah didn't react. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. The shock had crystallized into a protective coldness. She simply picked up the ultrasound from the table, folded it carefully, and put it in her pants pocket. The silent gesture was more powerful than any scream. She was taking possession of the evidence. That night, the house was a silent battlefield. Ryan tried to approach, tried to minimize, talking about the pressure of work, about misunderstandings. Sarah didn't respond. She locked herself in the guest bathroom, her heart pounding against her ribs. With trembling hands, she opened the packaging of her own pregnancy test. The minutes of waiting were the longest of her life. And then, the result. 2 lines. Positive. A dry, humorless laugh escaped her lips. The irony was of a cosmic cruelty. She was also pregnant. At the very moment she discovered her husband's betrayal, she discovered she was carrying his child. The joy she should have felt was instantly poisoned, turned into a terrible complication. She returned to the bedroom, lay down on the edge of the bed as far away from him as possible, and closed her eyes. The man sleeping beside her, whose breathing she could hear in the darkness, was no longer her husband. He was a stranger, and she was pregnant with a stranger. The next morning brought no clarity, only a dense fog of tension that hung over the condo like a cold front. The sun could barely penetrate the heavy clouds covering Chicago, and the gray light filtering through the windows seemed to tinge everything with the color of desolation. Sarah hadn't slept. She had spent the night in a state of suspended wakefulness, aware of Ryan's every movement in bed, every breath, which sounded like an affront in the silence of the room. The positive pregnancy test was hidden at the bottom of her underwear drawer, a secret within a secret, A small time bomb nestled next to the one that had already exploded. Ryan woke up first, or pretended to wake up. He moved with a caution that was unnatural for him, like a thief in his own house. Sarah watched him through her eyelashes, her body still, her breathing controlled. He dressed quickly without making a sound, choosing one of his most expensive suits, armor for the battle he knew awaited him outside those walls. He didn't try to talk to her. The confrontation of the night before had erected a glass wall between them, invisible but impassable. Before leaving the room, he stopped and looked at the bed, at her motionless form. For an instant, Sarah saw a flash of something on his face. Hesitation, perhaps even remorse, but it disappeared as quickly as it came, replaced by the mask of hurried determination. "I have to go. I have some urgent work things to resolve," he said to the silence of the room, the phrase sounding rehearsed, hollow. "We'll talk better tonight." Sarah didn't answer. She remained silent, and her silence was a more powerful response than any word. He waited for another second and, receiving nothing, left, closing the door softly behind him. The click of the lock was like a starting gun. An impulse she couldn't control made her get up. Her body ached from the sleepless night, the pregnancy nausea mixing with the nausea of betrayal. She needed to know. She needed one more piece, one more proof that she wasn't crazy, that the reality unfolding was as terrible as it seemed. Barefoot, she followed him. Her steps were ghostly on the hardwood floor, her heart beating in a disjointed, painful rhythm. She didn't know what she was looking for. A text message? A compromising call? Anything to solidify the quicksand beneath her feet. She caught up with him in the hallway leading to the garage. Ryan was standing near the service elevator door, his back to her, his cell phone pressed against his ear. He didn't see her. Sarah hid behind a concrete pillar, her body pressed against the cold surface, her breath suspended in her throat. She couldn't see the phone screen, couldn't identify who he was calling. But then, his voice, low and filled with a desperation she had never heard before, reached her, amplified by the empty acoustics of the garage. "Dad, I made a huge mistake." The word "Dad" hit her hard. He wasn't calling his mistress. He was calling his own father, his confidant, the man who had always protected him. The conversation was not one of seduction or planning. It was a cry for help. "I don't know how to fix this. I need help, please. The man upstairs is going to destroy me if this gets out." The phrase froze her. The man upstairs, Albert Sterling, the company owner, Tiffany's father. The threat didn't come from the betrayed wife, but from a much larger figure of power. A man who could, with a snap of his fingers, destroy the career Ryan valued so much. The mistake wasn't just the betrayal, it was the choice of the mistress. He hadn't gotten involved with just any colleague. He had gotten involved with the boss's daughter, a spoiled heiress and apparently a dangerous one. He didn't say what he did. He didn't say who was involved. But the panic in his voice was palpable. He was terrified. That wasn't the arrogant, aggressive Ryan from the night before, who had called her hysterical. That was a cornered man, a frightened boy running to his father. The duality of his character, the ability to be a tyrant to her and a supplicant to others, was repugnant. Sarah backed away step by step, her body trembling uncontrollably. She returned to the condo before he could finish the call, before he could turn around and find her there, a witness to his weakness. She closed the door behind her, locking it, and leaned against it, her body sliding to the floor. The tremor took hold of her, a convulsion that came from the depths of her soul. Something gigantic was hidden. Tiffany's pregnancy wasn't just a case of infidelity. It was a complex knot of power, money, and threats. And her pregnancy, her own pregnancy, which should have been a blessing, now seemed to have arrived at the worst possible time. She was no longer just the betrayed wife. She was an obstacle, a problem to be solved in Ryan's grand scheme to save his own skin. The revelation in the garage changed everything. It was no longer a love triangle. It was a minefield. And she was standing right in the middle of it, carrying a fragile life inside her. The loneliness she felt was overwhelming, an icy ocean swallowing her whole. She was alone against Ryan, against the mistress, against the mistress's powerful father. And the child growing in her womb, instead of being an ally, only seemed to make her more vulnerable. Hundreds of miles from the oppressive silence of Sarah's condo, in a luxury penthouse overlooking the Manhattan skyline, panic had a shrill voice and a name: Tiffany Sterling. At 20, Tiffany lived in a parallel universe, an ecosystem of privilege where every desire was an order and every obstacle a personal offense. The only daughter of magnate Albert Sterling, she had been raised believing that the world was an extension of her will, a stage for her dramas. The pregnancy, which for another woman might be a moment of introspection or fear, for Tiffany was leverage, a tool of power to get what she wanted. Ryan, not the man but the trophy, the conquest of taking him from his suburban life and installing him on her own golden pedestal. Her cell phone was an extension of her hand, a weapon she fired incessantly. The calls to Ryan piled up, a cascade of ignored notifications that only fueled her fury. She paced back and forth in her immaculate bedroom, a space that looked more like a designer showroom than a personal sanctuary. Impatience corroded her edges, the promise he had made becoming more fragile with every minute of silence. "Answer, answer, answer," she hissed at the device, her foot nervously tapping the Persian rug. When he finally answered, his voice was a hurried whisper, full of a caution she despised. "Tiffany, I can't talk right now." "You can't talk?" Her voice rose an octave, sharp as broken glass. "You promised you'd fix it. You looked me in the eye and said you'd tell her, that you'd leave everything. What are you waiting for? You promised you'd claim me." On the other end of the line, Ryan was desperately trying to contain the tide. He was in the company parking lot, looking over his shoulder every second, terrified of being overheard. "For God's sake, keep your voice down. Things got complicated. I need time." "Time? I don't have time," she screamed, hysteria beginning to take over. "I have your child growing inside me, and a belly that won't wait for your good graces. I'm telling my father today." The threat hung in the air, Tiffany's nuclear weapon. Ryan felt his blood run cold. The dread he had felt in the garage earlier returned with full force. Albert Sterling was not a man to be trifled with. He was an industry titan, a corporate predator, whose legend was built on the ruins of the careers of men who challenged him. "No, Tiffany, don't do that. Wait a little longer. Let me organize things." The plea in his voice was music to her ears. It was the sound of control, of surrender. But Tiffany was not moved by logic, but by impulse. Patience was a virtue she had never bothered to cultivate. Drama was her oxygen. Hanging up the phone in his face, she took a deep breath, not to calm down, but to gather the theatrical courage she needed. With determined steps, she marched out of her room, crossed the marble corridors of the mansion and burst into her father's office. Albert Sterling was behind his massive mahogany desk, an unlit cigar between his fingers, his eyes fixed on a financial projection spreadsheet. He was a man whose presence filled any room, authority emanating from him like a force field. He slowly raised his eyes when Tiffany entered, his expression impassive. "What is it now, Tiffany?" She stopped in the middle of the room, hands on her hips, a pose of defiance she had learned since childhood. She didn't hesitate. She threw the words like stones. "Dad, I'm pregnant." Albert didn't blink. He just watched her, the silence stretching. He waited. "And the father is Ryan." The revelation fell into the silent room. The name of Ryan, his most promising commercial manager, the man he himself had recruited and was grooming for higher positions. Albert's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes darkened. A dangerous coldness set in. He placed the cigar in the crystal ashtray with deadly precision. "Get out," he said, his voice low and controlled. "But Dad, get out. Now." Tiffany for the first time felt a chill of fear. She knew that tone. It was the tone that preceded the storm. She obeyed, leaving the office and closing the door behind her. Alone, Albert Sterling picked up the phone on his desk. He didn't dial. He just pressed a button on the intercom that connected him directly to his secretary. "Call Ryan Miller, to my office, now." The order traveled through the company's wires and cables, a shockwave that found Ryan in his own office, where he was desperately trying to put out the fire Tiffany had started. When the phone rang and Albert's secretary's voice sounded, he felt the ground open up beneath his feet. It was the call for execution. The hell began. Albert didn't waste time with preliminaries. His voice was like the scraping of metal against stone. "Is it true? You got my daughter pregnant?" Ryan froze. The air caught in his throat. Lying was useless. Denying would be an even faster suicide. He swallowed hard, the sound too loud in the deadly silence of the room. An almost imperceptible nod was his confession. "But I'm married, Mr. Sterling," he managed to whisper, as if that were an extenuating circumstance, a defense. It was the spark that ignited the gunpowder. The desk shook violently when Albert slammed his hand flat on the solid wood. "Married?" His voice exploded, a thunder that made Ryan take a step back. "You messed around with my daughter while married? You used my company's name, the trust I placed in you, to dishonor my family inside my own house? Fix it. Fix it now, or you're out of the company. And I guarantee you'll be out of any decent market in this state." Panic took over Ryan, a cold wave that paralyzed him. His career, his reputation, everything he had built with so much effort and ambition was disintegrating before his eyes. I need some time," he stammered, his mind racing, desperately looking for a way out, an escape route. "Time?" Albert laughed, a sound devoid of any humor. "You don't have time. You lost that right when you slept with my daughter. No, you will marry my daughter. You will claim my grandchild. And you will forget you have a wife. You will call her now in front of me and end everything. Or I will destroy your career, your life, and make sure you can never even sell a used car at a Sunday flea market. The choice is yours." The final order was given. It wasn't a negotiation, it was a sentence. Ryan left the room minutes later, nauseous, trembling, unable to breathe. He leaned against the hallway wall, cold sweat running down his forehead. He was trapped. A golden cage had closed around him, and the key was in Albert Sterling's pocket. While Ryan's world imploded, Tiffany, happy as could be, was posting stories on her Instagram. Sitting in the leather seat of her convertible Mercedes, with a radiant smile, she recorded a quick video, the caption flashing on the screen, "Life is perfect." For her, the chaos she had just sown was just the prelude to her victory. She had gotten what she wanted. The fact that a family was being destroyed in the process was just collateral damage, an insignificant detail in her grand narrative. Destroying a family wasn't a crime. It was a hobby, a sport for the bored and powerful. And she had just scored the winning point. Night fell over Chicago like a shroud, bringing with it a cold that seemed to emanate not from the atmosphere, but from the very heart of the events. For Sarah, the day had been a long, dark corridor, and dinner at her parents' house, scheduled weeks before, appeared at the end of it not as a light, but as a new form of torture. The idea of sitting at the table, smiling, pretending that her universe hadn't been shattered, was a superhuman effort. The nausea, now a constant companion, was not just a symptom of pregnancy. It was the physical manifestation of the revulsion she felt, of the poison of betrayal running through her veins. She dressed with the care of someone preparing for battle, not a family gathering. She chose a loose, dark-colored dress that disguised the paleness of her skin and didn't mark the belly that wasn't yet showing, but which she felt present every second, a constant reminder of her new and complicated reality. Looking in the mirror, she saw a stranger. Her eyes, usually lively and warm, were deep-set, shadowed by a pain she refused to show. There was a hardness in her jaw, a resolution that surprised her. She was no longer the same woman as the morning before. Fragility had been cauterized by the fire of truth. Ryan arrived home when she was already ready. He looked like a ghost, the color drained from his face, his shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. The arrogance of the previous night, the defensive fury, had all disappeared, replaced by a silent, palpable despair. He looked at her, his eyes pleading, like a man on the edge of a cliff looking for a hand to hold. But Sarah's hand was no longer extended. "Sarah, we need to talk," he began, his voice hoarse. "Not now, Ryan," she cut him off, her voice cold as ice. "My parents are waiting for us. I won't ruin their night because of you. Let's go." The drive to her parents' house was made in a sepulchral silence. Ryan drove mechanically, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white, He opened his mouth to speak several times, but the words died before they were born. He was trapped between Albert Sterling's ultimatum and his wife's wall of silence. Sarah looked out the window, the city lights passing like blurs, her mind miles away, tracing scenarios, calculating the next steps. She didn't know what the future held for her, but she knew with absolute certainty that Ryan would not be part of it. Dinner began with the usual forced normalcy. Sarah's mother, Susan, chatted about the neighborhood news in the suburbs of Naperville, while her father, Arthur, poured the wine, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension emanating from the couple. Sarah was pale, nauseous, barely touching her food. She answered questions with monosyllables, a weak smile on her lips, desperately trying to maintain the facade. Every laugh, every story told at the table sounded distant, as if coming from another world. Ryan, meanwhile, tried to appear calm, but it was a terrible performance. He drank the wine too quickly, the smile didn't reach his eyes, and his gaze constantly darted to the cell phone resting face down on the table. He was waiting for a call, a message, a sentence. And it came. The phone vibrated, once, twice, 3 times. A frantic, insistent vibration that broke the thin layer of normalcy at the table. The name Tiffany didn't light up the screen, as he had hidden it, but the vibration pattern was unmistakable. It was her, freaking out. With a sudden movement, his hand trembling, Ryan picked up the device, trying to silence it quickly before anyone noticed. But in his panic, his clumsy fingers did the unthinkable. Instead of rejecting the call, he answered it, and inadvertently pressed the speakerphone icon. Tiffany Sterling's voice exploded in the shocked silence of the dining room, shrill, furious, and unmistakable. "Ryan, what do you mean you're at your wife's dinner? My dad is waiting for you. He said you're going to marry me whether you like it or not. You're the father of my child." Absolute silence. A silence so deep and heavy that it seemed to have a physical form, crushing everyone at the table. Tiffany's voice echoed, the words floating like toxic smoke over the untouched food. Sarah's mother, Susan, let out a small, stifled cry, and the plate she was holding slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor with a deafening crash that made everyone jump. Her father, Arthur, turned purple, a vein throbbing in his forehead, his face transfigured by a fury Sarah rarely saw. The cousins, the aunts, everyone stopped with food halfway to their mouths, their eyes wide, moving from Ryan to Sarah and back like spectators of a slow-motion car accident. And Ryan turned white. Not pale. White. The color of death. He looked at the phone in his hand as if it were a grenade that had just exploded, taking his whole world with it. Amidst the general paralysis, Sarah moved. Slowly, with the dignity of a queen amidst the devastated court, she stood up. All eyes turned to her, expecting the collapse, the hysteria Ryan had accused her of having. But there was no hysteria in her eyes, only a sad, resolute calm. Her hand, in an instinctive and powerful gesture, rested on her own belly, a shield and a declaration. And then she spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it cut the silence like a blade. "Well, you got your boss's daughter pregnant, and you got your wife pregnant too." The second bomb. If the first had shocked, the second annihilated. A murmur of disbelief ran through the table. Ryan's face contorted into a mask of pure horror, the understanding of the abyss he had fallen into finally complete. He looked at her, his eyes full of desperate panic, and tried to speak, tried to save the unsalvageable. "Sarah, I love you." She raised her hand, a simple gesture that silenced him instantly. There was nothing more to be said. "I will raise my child far away from you," she declared, not to him, but to herself, to the world. Live the life you chose, or the one they forced you to live. Without another word, she turned. She walked past her sobbing mother, her father petrified with anger, and headed toward the door. Dignified, cold, beautiful in her pain and her strength. The door closed behind her, and the sound of the click was the final period on the story of their marriage. Inside, Ryan's world collapsed. Sarah's exit was not a bang, but a vacuum. The air, the light, the sound, everything was sucked out of the dining room along with her, leaving behind a dense, accusatory silence. He was left alone, the epicenter of shame and destruction, surrounded by the ruins of a family that had welcomed him and that he had betrayed so spectacularly. Dinner was over, and his life, as he knew it, was too. For a long moment, no one moved. Ryan remained standing, a statue of panic, the blood roaring in his ears. His father-in-law's face, Arthur, was a mask of contained fury, his eyes fixed on him with a contempt that was more painful than any physical blow. His mother-in-law, Susan, sobbed quietly in a corner, the sound of her crying like acid corroding what was left of Ryan's dignity. The other relatives, once so warm and welcoming, now looked at him as if he were a venomous creature that had infiltrated their nest. He was a stranger, an enemy. "Get out!" Arthur's voice was a low thunder, an order that allowed no contestation. "Get out of my house, now!" Ryan couldn't formulate a response. He just nodded, a spasmodic movement of his head. He grabbed his car keys and wallet from the table, his hands trembling so much he could barely hold them. Every step out of that house was a walk over broken glass. He didn't look back. The sound of the door closing behind him was definitive, the expulsion from the paradise he himself had set on fire. He got into the Audi, the car that was once a symbol of his success and now seemed like a metal coffin. He sat behind the wheel, but didn't start the engine. He just stayed there in the dark of the quiet suburban street, the sound of his own ragged breathing filling the space. What would he do? Where would he go? Going back to the condo he shared with Sarah was unthinkable. The space, once a home, was now enemy territory, a monument to his betrayal. He had nowhere to go. He was literally homeless, expelled from every place he had once belonged. His cell phone vibrated again. "Tiffany." He answered, his voice a thread. "What is it? What is it?" she screamed from the other end, oblivious to the cataclysm that had just occurred. "My dad wants to talk to you. Tomorrow, at 8. He said not to be late." "So, did you tell her? Did you fix it?" The triviality of the question, her complete lack of awareness of the magnitude of the destruction, was the last straw. "I fixed it, Tiffany," he said, his voice hollow, lifeless. "I just destroyed my life because of you. Are you happy?" He hung up before she could answer. He rested his forehead on the cold steering wheel, the smell of new leather suffocating him. A dry sob escaped his throat, a sound of pure agony. He didn't cry for love of Sarah. He cried for himself. He cried for the loss of his comfortable life, for the loss of the admiration he valued so much, for the loss of control. It was the selfish cry of a man who finally understood that he had bet everything and lost spectacularly. After an hour that felt like an eternity, he started the car. He drove aimlessly through the streets of Chicago, the city indifferent to his personal drama. He ended up in a cheap roadside motel, an anonymous place where no one knew him. The room smelled of disinfectant and loneliness. That night he didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, while the weight of his actions crushed him. The next day, the meeting with Albert Sterling was the formalization of his surrender. There was no discussion. Albert presented the terms as if dictating an acquisition contract. Ryan would divorce Sarah immediately. He would marry Tiffany in a month. He would publicly claim paternity. In exchange, he would keep his job and receive a substantial bonus to facilitate the transition. It wasn't an offer. It was an order of enlistment into a life that wasn't his. The process of separating from Sarah was as cold and impersonal as a surgical procedure. They didn't speak directly. Everything was mediated by lawyers. Ryan signed the papers his lawyer presented to him, agreeing to the alimony, the division of assets, everything. He didn't fight for anything. He had neither the right nor the strength for it. They sold the condo, and every object that was boxed up was a reminder of the life he had imploded. The last time he saw Sarah was at the final divorce signing. She was serene, dressed with discreet elegance, her pregnancy belly beginning to show. She didn't look him in the eye, she just signed her name with a steady pen and left, leaving him behind with the lawyer and the weight of his new reality. Ryan thought about asking for visitation, about fighting legally for the daughter he never held, but the shame was greater than any right. He knew he would have to face the gaze of Arthur, Susan, and everyone who had expelled him from the house like a mangy dog. And he also knew that any judge would look at the case and give full custody to Sarah without even blinking. So he signed the waiver silently, swallowing his pride along with the rest of the crumbs he still called dignity. The wedding to Tiffany happened on a grey winter day at a courthouse downtown. The only people present were Albert, Tiffany's mother, a woman as superficial as her daughter, and the lawyers. Tiffany wore a short, expensive white dress, her smile radiant for the selfies she took incessantly, documenting her big day. Ryan wore a dark suit that looked like a shroud. When the justice of the peace asked if he accepted her as his wife, he heard his own voice say, "I do," a distant sound that seemed to come from someone else. At that moment, he felt like a man watching his own execution. There was no party, no honeymoon. After the courthouse, Albert took them to lunch at an expensive restaurant where he talked business the whole time, as if the wedding were just another item crossed off his to-do list. Married life with Tiffany was a surreal nightmare. They moved into a gigantic penthouse Albert gave them, an impersonal and cold space, decorated by a designer they never met. Tiffany, as a wife, was the same as ever, irresponsible, impulsive, and completely focused on herself. The pregnancy was her main tool of manipulation and her passport to a life of absolute leisure. She spent her days at the mall, at spas, having lunch with friends, while Ryan immersed himself in work, the only arena where he still felt he had some control, however small. The nights were the worst. They slept in separate rooms. The silence in the house was deafening, broken only by Tiffany's cell phone notifications or the sound of the television she watched late into the night. There were no conversations, no intimacy, no partnership. There was only the forced coexistence of two strangers united by a mistake and a contract. Ryan felt like a full-time employee. During the day, he worked for Albert. At night, he was the provider who financed Tiffany's lifestyle. He tried at first. He tried to create a connection, talk about the baby, about the future. But Tiffany had no interest. For her, the future was the next trip, the next designer bag, the next party. The baby was an abstract concept, a story to tell, not a reality to prepare for. "Ugh, Ryan, don't be a bore," she would say, rolling her eyes when he tried to show her a book on fatherhood. "We'll hire a nanny, a nurse, whatever. My dad pays." The constant mention of her father was a weapon she used with precision. "My dad pays. My dad fixes it. My dad said." Ryan was an accessory in her life, a supporting actor in the show financed by Albert Sterling. The humiliation was constant, subtle, daily. He had traded a wife who respected and loved him for an heiress who saw him as little more than a prize stud. Regret was a chronic disease, a dull ache that accompanied him every moment, every breath. And in the silence of his lonely nights, in the vastness of his luxury penthouse, he was the poorest and most miserable man in the world. When the baby was born, a healthy boy with Ryan's eerily familiar eyes, Tiffany's fantasy completely shattered. The birth, which she had broadcast in a series of carefully edited stories from the most expensive maternity ward in the city, complete with a makeup artist and photographer, was the final act of her performance. The reality that followed had no filter. Real motherhood with its sleepless nights, its smelly diapers, and the incessant high-pitched crying of a totally dependent being lacked the glamour she had imagined. The baby was not a designer accessory that could be put away in the box when she got tired of it. He was a constant demand, a little tyrant who didn't care about her beauty sleep, her social engagements, or her need for attention. Ryan, meanwhile, felt a pang of something that almost resembled hope when he held his son, whom they named Theo, for the first time. In that small, wrinkled face, he saw a chance, perhaps the only one, to find some meaning amidst the disaster of his life. He clung to that small life with the strength of a drowning man. Maybe, he thought, this could unite them. Maybe fatherhood could transform Tiffany, mature her, create a genuine bond between them. It was a fragile hope, quickly crushed by reality. Tiffany saw the baby's crying not as a need but as a personal aggression. She got annoyed, complained about the noise, the loss of her freedom. 2 weeks after the birth, the farce came to an end. With the excuse of postpartum depression that she self-diagnosed and used as a free pass for abandonment, she packed her bags. Ryan found her in the gigantic walk-in closet, surrounded by leather travel bags. "What are you doing?" he asked, little Theo asleep on his shoulder. "I can't take this anymore," she said, her voice hard, without any trace of the manufactured sweetness she used in public. "This crying, this house smelling of milk. I wasn't born for this. I need some time for myself. I'm going on a trip with the girls." "A trip? Tiffany, we have a 2-week-old son." "So what?" she retorted, closing a suitcase with an aggressive click. "You keep him. Didn't you want to be a father? Great. Be one. Hire nannies, nurses, do whatever you want. My dad pays." And she left, without a goodbye kiss for her son, without a look back. She disappeared for weeks, which turned into months, with sporadic and brief appearances. She left him alone with a newborn. Ryan, the ambitious commercial manager, the man who dreamed of conquering the world, became a nanny and an employee, all at the same time. His life became an endless, maddening cycle of 3 a.m. feedings, 5 a.m. colic, and 9 a.m. video meetings with a crying baby in the background as he tried to project confidence and competence to clients and subordinates. Exhaustion became his natural state, a thick fog that dulled his thoughts and weighed on his limbs. Albert Sterling's pressure was relentless. The father-in-law didn't see the situation with compassion. He saw it as another failure of Ryan's, more proof of his incompetence in controlling his own wife. He treated Ryan not as a son-in-law, but as a second-class employee, an acquired asset that was not performing as expected. The demands at work intensified, and Ryan's personal life became a logistical hell. He lived between nannies who didn't last, sleepless nights, and the crushing loneliness of a silent penthouse where the only sound was his son's crying and the echo of his own failures. Tiffany never truly wanted Ryan. She only wanted the status of the conquest, the attention, the drama of the situation. Once obtained, the prize lost interest. And he, the prize, was left to pick up the pieces, living in eternal regret, a life sentence he himself had built. Meanwhile, in the parallel universe where dignity flourished, Sarah's life was rising from the ashes. The pain of betrayal, though deep, did not define her. Instead, it transformed her. Supported by a family that, after the initial shock, closed ranks around her with a fierce and protective love, she flourished. The pregnancy, which had once seemed like a complication, became her anchor, her purpose. She focused on herself, her health, and her work. 2 months after the birth of Ryan's son, Sarah gave birth to her daughter, a beautiful and serene girl she named Eleanor. Holding her daughter in her arms for the first time was a moment of epiphany. All the chaos, all the pain, everything dissolved before that tiny life that depended on her. The strength she had discovered in herself multiplied. She returned to her clinic not as a broken woman, but as a force of nature. Her personal experience gave her a new depth, an empathy that her patients felt and admired. The business prospered so much that in less than a year she opened a new, larger, more modern clinic unit, a monument to her rebirth. She became more beautiful, not in a superficial way, but illuminated by an inner strength, a peace hard won. She and Ryan only spoke through lawyers, impersonal emails dealing with deposits and dates, keeping the abyss between their worlds intact. A year later, destiny, with its cruel and poetic irony, orchestrated the epilogue. It was a sunny autumn afternoon in Chicago. Sarah was strolling through Lincoln Park, pushing the stroller where Eleanor slept peacefully, her face serene under the canopy. Sarah was radiant, wearing a light dress, her hair loose in the wind, a soft smile on her lips as she watched the dry leaves fall. That's when she saw him. Ryan was on the other side of the path, standing, holding the baby he had with Tiffany alone. He looked like a shadow of the man he had been. He was thinner, with deep dark circles that looked like bruises. His expensive suit wrinkled and an expression of permanent exhaustion etched on his face. The baby in his arms was fussy, whimpering, and he rocked him with a mechanical, clumsy movement, his gaze lost in the void. His eyes, once so full of ambition and self-confidence, were now dull, defeated. Their eyes met across the space that separated them. The world seemed to stop for an instant. For Ryan, it was like being struck by lightning. He saw her, the woman he destroyed, now whole, luminous, more beautiful than ever. He saw the peace on her face, the lightness in her posture, and he saw in the stroller the outline of his other daughter, the daughter he only knew from photos in the legal process, sleeping peacefully. A wave of everything he had lost hit him with the force of a tidal wave. Love, respect, family, peace of mind. A desperate impulse moved him. He took a step forward, his mouth opening to say something. Her name, an apology, a plea, anything that could for a second alleviate the overwhelming weight on his soul. But Sarah didn't give him the chance. She didn't look away. She stared at him, and on her face there was no hatred, no pity, no triumph. There was only a calm acceptance. She just smiled, a light, serene smile, the smile of someone who is at peace with her past and at home in her present. And then she spoke, her voice calm and clear, carried by the gentle afternoon wind, loud enough only for him to hear. We took very different paths, Ryan. And thank God, mine is light. She didn't wait for an answer. There was nothing he could say that mattered. With the same dignity with which she had left her family's dinner a year earlier, she gently turned the stroller and walked on, continuing her path under the autumn sun, leaving him behind. He stood still, rooted to the ground, destroyed. Her words, so simple, were the final sentence. Mine is light. The phrase echoed in his mind, highlighting the unbearable weight of his own existence. He looked at the whimpering son in his arms, a burden he loved and resented in equal measure. He looked at the path where Sarah had disappeared, a path of light and peace he could never walk again. The image of her walking away, free, strong mother winner, was his final punishment. He was a prisoner, forever chained to his own choices, and in the deafening silence of his ruined life, the loudest sound was the echo of her silence. What did you think of this story? From 0 to 10, what rating would you give it? Subscribe to the channel and click on the bell to receive all our stories. And take the opportunity to watch another amazing story by clicking on the screen. Thank you, and see you next time.